Hi, and welcome to Hungry Cat Games, an indie game developer. I'm Gary, and I recently competed in the however you say that, the Miz Game Jam, and today's video is a devlog of the process I went through. A quick background on game jams. They usually are based on a theme or some other common factor and have a set time limit, sometimes very aggressive. The theme of this jam was that all participants have to use the same graphic set and have no more than 48 hours spread over 9 days to create a game. The graphic set came from Kenny at kenny.nl and is a library of 16 pixel by 16 pixel tiles or sprites in 1-bit color. Really old school, similar to the old Ultima 1, 2, or 3 style graphics, at least for those who were around in the early 80s and remember this. Once the start time arrived, the graphic theme was posted and I immediately got to work. Or at least I'd like to think that's what happened. In reality, I downloaded the pack, opened it up, and what the heck am I going to make with this? First thought was, of course, an Ultima clone or a platformer, but given the number of people who signed up, at least a couple thousand, I think, I'm sure there would be a bunch of these type of games. Part of the rating includes original use of graphics, engaging gameplay, and overall polish. Here at Hungry Cat Games, our philosophy is to avoid creating games centered around violence. I believe there are enough other genres out there, including puzzles, adventures, and sims, that can be fun and potentially marketable. So back to development, or lack of. I sat and stared at the graphics for a bit. Dungeon shapes, armored figures, beakers and flasks, spaceships, cars, playing cards, flags, bones, creatures, and a whole bunch more. What could I do with these? The graphic theme was announced for me at 9 p.m. local time. After a few hours of looking over the pics and thinking, I finally decided to sleep on it. If I couldn't come up with something the next day, I'd probably just withdraw from the jam. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up and thought, Museum Simulator. No idea what prompted that, but I could work with it. In the morning, with the concept in mind, I thought a little about how it would work and settled on a 3D style for the look. Some of the other features included placing floors, placing exhibits, setting up restaurants, bathrooms, and gift shops, multiple visitors, full gimbal camera control, money and happiness settings for the visitors, and some type of scenario goal to win. Ideally, multiple scenarios. Now, with some features in mind, I moved on to some quick graphic mockups. Using Blender, I made a floor and a wall. These were then moved into Unity and turned into prefabs and then placed in a scene. The camera control I was working on for a different game was proving problematic, so I used the opportunity to research and develop a new one. Ultimately, I'd like it mouse-based, but for now the examples I found using a keyboard were acceptable for this game. It took a bit to get it working how I wanted and even more to constrain it from zooming way out of scale with the game arena, but in the end I was satisfied with the controls. Spending some more time in Blender, I created more floor tiles and some exhibits based on the ring, necklace, and crown shapes. The creation was fairly straightforward in that the base cube is the size I used for the floor tiles and a reduced size for exhibits. The visitor and some of the exhibits were actually created with a 3D effect. Bringing the sprite into Blender, I used an extrude in one way or another to get the object effect I was after, while still staying true to the tile set and appearance. In the case of the visitor, I went ahead and set up an armature and then used that for a basic walking animation. Nothing fancy at this time, a bit more advanced animation would be considered later if time permitted. The visitor was brought into Unity and set up. However, I don't want to control or drive the visitor around, but rather have them be autonomous. In order to accomplish this, I added a nav mesh and spent the time to set it up and get the visitors working on it. The visitor prefab was set up as a nav agent. The general logic is to have a state machine on the visitor. Either they are standing, as if viewing an exhibit, or they are picking a new location, or they are moving to the location. If moving, turn on the animation, and if not moving, turn it off. Setting up an update cycle to handle this is fairly straightforward. With the visitor walking around on their own, I moved on to being able to create floors and exhibits. Using a sprite, I created a basic GUI panel which will hold the user interface, info, and buttons. The panel was comprised entirely of elements from the sprite pack and colored using colors from the sprite pack. Setting up a canvas interface with buttons is pretty straightforward, however I wanted a fairly simple process for dealing with dozens of buttons. At the end of the day, I used a common script that is called by almost every button. This script basically does a case statement on the button name and from there sets a variable to hold the current button number. With the buttons set up, I linked them to a public array of game objects and was able to start placing items as a player would. From here, the game really started to come together. With exhibit creation in place and visitors walking around, everything else was just details now. I added trigger colliders on the exhibit so when visitors got within a certain distance, I could change a variable. Using the happiness factor, each visitor starts out happy. As they move around, they get tired, which decreases their happiness. Seeing exhibits gives them a little boost each time. Enough exhibits easily offsets the moving penalty. While I wanted to model a bathroom, restaurant, and gift shop, I finally settled on these being off-screen, and instead you had to hire people to run each of them. No chef on the payroll, then your snack bar is unavailable. As visitors move, they also eventually need to use the bathroom and to eat. If they can't do these, happiness takes a big hit for each one. The gift shop works a little differently. If you have hired a gift shop clerk, then each visitor makes a random check upon leaving the museum to see if they buy something in the gift shop or not. If they do, it's another random value for the amount they spend, which can be substantially more than admission cost. With a bunch of visitors, hiring a clerk is like having free income. With all of these system-level variables to track, I made a script with nothing but variables. Making them static allowed me to refer to them from anywhere by just qualifying the class in front of the variable name. It also created an easy place to go to tweak settings. Most of the values were parameterized, allowing me to tweak the mechanics to make it harder or easier to play. In practice, if this was a fully realized game, then each scenario would adjust these settings. For the Jam, I only have one scenario. It still provides well over an hour of playtime. Speaking of playtime, each day of game time takes 60 seconds of real time, so a goal of meeting scenario criteria within 100 days means you could play for up to an hour and 40 minutes to either win or lose. Some parameter screens along with a basic menu and win-lose screens were added. At this point, the game was fully functional from a mechanics perspective. The original design was to have 3 rows of exhibit icons to select from. This would be around 90 to 100 different exhibits and floor treatments. With 4 hours left, I started to model more exhibits. They went quickly, but it soon became apparent I wasn't going to be able to create the 75 or more that I still needed. I did what I could, reorganized the button panel to accommodate the lower amount, and called it done. If life, my day job, and other responsibilities and commitments had actually allowed me to put in the full 48 hours instead of about 35 I was able to carve out, I would have easily finished the remaining objects. I also wanted to have a little money animation showing what you just spent when you build or destroy something, and was looking into a background crowd sound loop that would play louder and quieter as your visitor count went up or down. Also, I was hoping to have 4 different visitors, the mom, dad, boy, and girl animated figures. I think with the additional 13 hours, all of this would have been easily accomplished, and probably a few other features too. Even knowing all the details of how the mechanics work, I find it to be a challenge to play, but also reasonably possible to win. After submitting, I did a full playthrough and completed the scenario in 71 days with most of the museum filled with exhibits. Thanks to Miz for setting up this jam. The only change I would suggest for next time is to extend the timeline out another week to make it easier to find 48 hours in total to work on it. All told, it was a fun game to create and play, and I hope all of you find it fun to play.